Fear is one of the oldest companions of the human soul. Long before we learn to speak, we learn to fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of death. It whispers to us in the night and shouts at us in moments of crisis. It shapes our decisions, narrows our vision, and convinces us that survival is the highest good. And yet, into this ancient human condition, Scripture repeatedly speaks a command that sounds almost unreasonable. Fear not. It is said not once, but again and again spoken to prophets and peasants, kings and captives, the faithful and the broken. The command is not naive. It does not deny the presence of danger, pain, or uncertainty. Instead, it challenges the deepest assumption fear makes, that we are alone, that chaos rules, and that our lives are ultimately at the mercy of chance. To fear not is not to pretend life is safe. It is to trust that life is held. The illusion of control. Modern life is built on the promise of control. We plan our careers, insure our bodies, schedule our futures, and curate our identities. We are taught that with enough discipline, intelligence, and effort, we can shape our destiny. But beneath this promise lies a quiet anxiety. What if I lose control? A diagnosis arrives uninvited. A relationship collapses without warning. A dream fails despite years of effort. In these moments, fear is not simply an emotion, it is the collapse of an illusion. We realize that control was never truly ours. The Bible never flatters our need for control. Instead, it exposes it. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Proverbs 19:21. This is not a threat. It is a release. God's sovereignty does not diminish human life, it redeems it. To trust God's plan is not to surrender responsibility, but to surrender the burden of pretending we are God. Fear thrives where we believe everything depends on us. Faith begins when we accept that it does not. God's plan is not a straight line, one of the most dangerous misunderstandings about trusting. God's plan is the belief that it will be predictable, comfortable, or immediately understandable. Scripture tells a different story. Joseph is betrayed by his brothers before becoming a leader. Moses flees as a murderer before becoming a deliverer. David is anointed king and then hunted like an animal. Jesus is declared the Son of God and then crucified. If God's plan were judged only by its early chapters, it would often appear as failure. Fear arises when we judge God's faithfulness by the present moment alone. But faith sees history not as fragments, but as a story still being written. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Isaiah 55:8. God's plan is not a straight line from desire to fulfillment. It is a path that often winds through waiting, loss, silence, and apparent defeat. Yet these are not detours. They are part of the formation. What fear calls delay, God calls preparation. What fear calls abandonment, God calls hidden work. What fear calls the end, God often calls the beginning. The God who enters fear. Christian, faith is not built on the idea of a distant God who demands trust from afar. It is built on the scandal of a God who enters human fear from within. Jesus does not shout, "Fear not," from a safe distance. He speaks it while walking on stormy waters, while standing at the tomb of a friend, while sweating blood in Gits in the garden. Jesus prays not as a detached deity, but as a trembling human being, My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. This matters. It means fear itself is not a sin. Fear is a human response to vulnerability. The sin is allowing fear to become our master. Jesus shows us that trust in God's plan does not eliminate anguish, but it anchors us within it. Not my will, but yours be done. This is not resignation. It is the highest form of freedom. Choosing trust even when understanding fails. Fear and the false god of certainty. We often believe that if God would simply explain everything, our fear would disappear. But Scripture rarely offers explanations. Instead, it offers presence. Job never receives an answer to why he suffered. Paul is never told why. The thorn remains. The disciples are never told why the Messiah must die until after the resurrection. Certainty is not the opposite of fear. Sometimes, certainty is fear disguised as knowledge. God does not promise us a map. He promises us Himself. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Psalm 23-4. Notice the psalm does not say, God removes the valley. It says God enters it, trusting. God's plan is not trusting a set of outcomes, it is trusting a relationship. When God's plan breaks our expectations, many people lose faith, not because they stop believing in God, but because God does not behave as they expected. They trusted God for healing, and the illness remained. They prayed for reconciliation. The relationship ended. They believed obedience would lead to blessing. Instead, found hardship. Fear whispers in these moments. God has failed you, but Scripture suggests a more uncomfortable truth. Sometimes our expectations, not God, are what need to die. Jesus was rejected not by atheists, but by the religious, those most confident. They understood God's plan. They expected a Messiah who would conquer Rome, not sin. They wanted power, not a cross. Yet it was precisely through the cross that God's deepest purpose was revealed. Trusting God's plan often means allowing our false versions of God to be dismantled. This is painful, but it is also necessary. A God who always meets our expectations would be no greater than our imagination. Fear of the unknown and the God who goes ahead. The future terrifies us because it is unknowable. We do not fear what we see, we fear what we cannot see. But Scripture reframes the unknown. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Isaiah 43-19. God is not waiting in the future, observing what we will do. He is already there, preparing what we will need. To trust God's plan is to believe that the unknown is not empty. It is inhabited by God's faithfulness. When Israel stood before the Red Sea, fear said, there is no way forward. Faith said, God has not brought us this far to abandon us. The sea did not part until they stepped forward. Faith does not always remove fear before action. Often, it demands obedience in the presence of fear. Fear as a teacher, not a tyrant. Fear can reveal what we value most. We fear losing what we love. We fear threats to our identity. We fear what exposes our limits. God does not always silence fear immediately. Sometimes, He uses it to reveal where our trust truly lies. Are we trusting God or the outcomes we want God to produce? Are we trusting God or our ability to manage life? When fear exposes misplaced trust, it becomes an invitation, not a condemnation. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5-7. Casting implies release. It assumes weight. God does not shame us for carrying fear. He invites us to hand it over. The quiet power of daily trusting God's plan, is rarely dramatic. It is lived out in ordinary obedience. Choosing integrity when compromise is easier. Choosing forgiveness when resentment feels justified. Choosing hope when circumstances offer none. These choices do not eliminate fear overnight, but they weaken its authority. Faith grows not through grand declarations, but through repeated acts of trust in small moments. God's plan is often revealed backward. We understand it not while living it, but when looking back and realizing we were carried through what should have destroyed us. Fear not. The final word is written. The heart of Christian faith stands a truth that reframes every fear. Death does not have the final word. The resurrection of Jesus is not merely a miracle, it is a declaration about reality itself. It means that no loss is ultimate, no suffering wasted, no obedience unseen. If God can bring life out of a tomb, He can bring purpose out of confusion. To trust God's plan is to believe that even when things fall apart, they are not falling out of His hands. Fear says, this is the end. Faith says, God is not finished. Choosing trust in a fearful world, fear not, is not a denial of pain. It is a defiant hope spoken in the face of it. It is the courage to believe that God's plan is wiser than our fears, deeper than our understanding, and stronger than our failures. You may not see where the road leads. You may not understand why the path is difficult. You may not feel brave, but faith does not require certainty, only trust. And trust begins with a simple, trembling decision to place your life not in your control, not in your fear, but in the hands of a God who sees the end from the beginning, and who has proven His love not by avoiding suffering, but by entering it. Fear not because life is safe, but because God is faithful, and His plan for your life and for the world is greater than anything fear could ever threaten.